You're listening to the Pastor Pod, sharing what we're learning to help you lead well in our culture today. This podcast is hosted by Pastors Josh Robinson and Jay Mudd. Their goal is to be real, transparent, and let you in on what pastors really think about stuff.
Well, hey, welcome back to the Pastor Pod. We're glad you have taken some time to join us. If you are new to the podcast, my name is Josh, and I'm a pastor in Venice, Florida, and also always joined by my good friend and co-host Jay Mudd. He is not able to join us today with all that's going on with an amazing church that's beginning in Village Point. But I'm here today for episode 97 with a friend from back in the day at Bible College, Justin Peterson. Hey, man, so glad you're with us.
Thanks, man. It's so good to be here with you guys.
Well, this is exciting. I know we got to see each other a few weeks ago, or gosh, maybe that was a month ago. It seems like that was October. Okay. So here we are, almost December, and we were at a church planning conference, and they stationed us at the same table, and I look over, I'm like, oh my goodness.
Blast from the past, man.
Yeah. So it was really cool to connect there. And I said, man, I really would love you to come on the Pastor Pod, and just we want to learn from you and get to know you more and see what God is doing in your life. So just, if you can, just kind of introduce yourself to the Pastor Pod audience and tell us a little about you and your family and your church, and that'd be great.
Yeah, man. Well, thanks for having me on. I was born and raised in just outside of Jacksonville, Florida, a little town you've been to, I'm sure, called Yulee, Florida. Little tiny town. It's grown since I've left, but grew up there, and then went to the Baptist College of Florida in Graceville, where we met 20 years ago or so.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Just wild. Which, as we were discussing earlier, they changed their name, so we can no longer say the Baptist College of Florida.
Yeah, it's really thrown my life off base. I don't
Yeah.
I'm kidding. No, we were laughing about it a few minutes ago, because I said, what do you think about it? And if you're wondering, what is this school you're talking of? I mean, I've never heard of it. Where is it located? Listen, it's located in Graceville, Florida. The tagline for the city is "Where the living is easy." And so, little bitty town in the Panhandle of Florida. Great memories. Yeah. I met Cassie, my wife, there, and so many great friends over the years. But they just went through a name change. It's no longer the Baptist College of Florida. Now it's the Baptist University of Florida. So, I mean, it sounds like big. I mean,
big time, man.
We're going big. And I'm in a group text with some guys from our same school, and we've done fantasy football for years just for fun. And some of the guys were wanting to reissue their diploma because of the new name. They're like, I want the new thing. I want the new swag. I want the new coffee mug. And I'm over there going, I don't know if I'm ready. I'm not sure if I'm ready.
No, I want the old one. I want the OG BCF days. So anyways, I went, Baptist College of Florida, I think I was there from 2003 to 2007. And then shortly after that, shortly after graduating, I moved to Portland, Oregon to go to Western Seminary. And I moved out here to where I am now, moved to Portland to go to Western to do my MDiv, but primarily to study under a guy named Gary Brashears, who is the theology professor, has been the theology professor there for years. And moved to Portland, knew no one really in the city. You and I had a mutual friend from college that was out here that moved at the same time. Other than that, I knew no one. So did my MDiv there from 2008, 2011, got married, had a couple kids. I'll get to them in just a bit. And then did my doctoral work at Western again in 2019 through COVID, through 2022. And then somewhere along the way, I planted a church in Hillsboro, which is a kind of western suburb of Portland. Planted that in 2015, which I'm sure we'll talk more about. And dude, I love what I get to do. I love pastoring. Thinking about BCF days makes me think of, that was when it was the first time in my life someone ever paid me to do ministry.
Yeah. And
we all have that moment, where someone's like, we'll pay you $500 to be our youth pastor. And you're like, you're going to pay me?
Like money?
Like at the time, like $500? This is unreal. And in some ways,
I can go to Hardee's now.
Yeah. In some ways, I've, haven't outgrown that. Like I make obviously thankfully more than 500 a month. But it's like, I still can't believe like we get to provide for our family, and
Yeah.
it's just what an honor. Yeah. So pastoring that church, love it. Yeah. But the greatest thing going in my life is my family for sure.
Yeah.
Married to Katie. We've been married 12 years. We have 2 daughters. I'm girl dad. Naya is 10. Willa is 5. Both of our girls are adopted. We adopted Naya from Ghana, West Africa, and we adopted Willa from the great nation of Texas, just outside of Houston and Beaumont. And yeah, over the years we've had a rotating door of foster kids in our home. We partner with a ministry here called Safe Families, which is
Awesome.
kind of a step before kids get into the foster care system. And so over the years, we've just had a dozen or so kids come through our home, but 2 that are permanently with us.
Man, what a
So
blessing.
that's a little bit about me.
That's awesome. I love what you're doing, and just our time in October talking in person. I was like, we didn't have as much time in between all the sessions, and I said, I really want to hear more about Table Community Church, the church you pastor and help lead. And I just wanted you to tell us a little bit of what God's been doing. Tell us when you came, tell us what God has been doing through these years. And I mean, obviously, and we chatted a little bit about this. The year of 2020 and all that was very different for you and me, just on where we lived, in the states that we live in, and then maybe some of the unique challenges of where we're serving. So just not necessarily, I don't really want to talk about 2020, if I'm honest, but talk about the story of God and how He's been working in and through your church. And it's just a little bit you shared. I was just super excited to hear more about it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny. COVID obviously lasted way long. COVID, like the restrictions lasted way longer here. For you guys, it was like you took a couple weeks off and back at it. You know what I mean? Like I remember talking to some of my buddies. We have a mutual friend in Yulee, and like I went to visit in like Florida right in the thick of COVID, like that summer of 2020, and like everyone was just like over it, and and it was like tight lockdown in Oregon. But yeah, we don't have to talk about all that. So backstory to 2020, for context for those listening. So I planted Table Community Church in 2015. At the time, I was an associate pastor at a church about 30 minutes away in like a neighboring suburb. And I was in that stage of life where I felt this tug to preach more and to lead more and to step more into my giftings as I was discovering what those were. And went to my elders at the time and told them that. So I'm like 20, let's see, at that time I would have been like 28 or so, and told them, hey, I'm not going to just like up and leave. And I have no desire to just send out my resume to random churches, but I do want to be candid and tell you, like, I think my time here is coming to an end. And unbeknownst to me, they had also been praying about planting a church. And so a couple weeks later, they come back to me and say, what do you think about moving to Hillsboro and taking the 30 people, so about 30 people, one community that quickly multiplied into 2, but they were driving 30 minutes to come to the church I was on staff at. And then they were just going back to their life in this other town. And so my wife and I honestly didn't. I mean, we said, we'll pray about it. And then it was pretty much like the next day, like, yes, because it was just an answer to our prayer.
Yeah.
But it's her hometown. She grew up here. The guy who's now my XP, who was the community leader of the community that was out here, it's his wife's hometown. So for us, it was like, we get to go do ministry in their place, like where they grew up and where their family is. And so, moved out in 2015. But at the time, we were part of what we would typically call like a multi-site church. We use the language multi-congregational, but we were the first ones out of the gate. So it was like the sending church, and then they sent us out. And honestly, I'm super grateful for the way we began, because I don't think I have the church planter DNA. Like I don't have the parachute into a city where you know no one, plant a church, build a team, whatever. But I did have the like shepherding preaching gift. And so from my perspective, it was less like church planting and more like I just had a really small church. Like these were my 30 people and I was going to shepherd them really well. And the sending church, there's certainly like faults and dysfunction in the way we got started and sent, as there are in a lot of those scenarios. But to their credit, like they fully blessed us and sent us financially. Like we didn't have to think about anything. And so they sent us out and we just got to like have fun. Man, it was just a blast. So by the time 2020 hit, we were now one of 5 congregations in this family of churches. But we, as the first ones out of the gate, were feeling the pressure of growth and change and wanting to, kind of the way I worded it to our congregation is like we were living in mom's basement, but we had we needed to launch out on our own. So we started that conversation in 2019, and then COVID hits, and it's the world is just upside down, and especially here, summer of 2020 was just brutal in Portland. And we just kind of our local elders put a halt to that. And through 2020, for a number of reasons, the decision was made to just disband that family. And it was hard, sad in some ways. But for us, for our body, our congregation, it was a real gift to be able to kind of launch out on our own. And the Lord was super faithful through that whole process. Like I know a lot of church planters, church planting's hard. COVID was especially hard. Our story was different. Like it wasn't easy. There were some challenges along the way for sure. But by and large, it was just like really sweet. Every year has been sweeter than the year before it.
That's awesome.
So here we are, 2023, 8 years in, coming up on our 9th year, I guess. And God's just been super faithful along the way.
That's awesome. So you guys became your own, I guess you call it independent church. What you said was around 21?
Yeah. So we started the conversation so the way our model worked, not to get into the weeds too much, but the way our model worked is we had local elders, local preaching pastor, local staff, local budget, everything was like localized and contextualized, but we functioned as one legal entity.
Gotcha.
Like one church. So we were all on the same insurance. If we wanted to take out a loan, the whole was taking out a loan.
Gotcha.
And so we had kind of outgrown that model. That model worked. If you talk to any guys who have done like multi-congregational stuff, the model is great for planting and sending churches. Where it gets really sticky is when one of those churches that was sent out grows, and in this case grows beyond the sending church numerically. It just gets really difficult to navigate. And I'm not saying you can't do it. Like there's some I have a friend in kind of your neck of the woods down in Naples, and they're doing it, and I think it can work. But it's a very I heard another guy say it was just a very fragile model. And that would have been my experience with it.
That's cool. So you guys were able to move out on your own, and you shared you went through some mergers as well, right? Some or other people call them adoptions. I tend to like that word more. Tell us that story about how God has worked through churches coming together and merging together.
Yeah, so we've been through 2. So I'll start with the first one. 2 years into our church plant, we were I don't know, Josh, we were probably like 100 people, 140 people, somewhere in that range on a Sunday morning. So still like very small, but things had been growing, and God was doing some really cool things. And I didn't know church mergers existed. Like I wasn't familiar. There's a book called Better Together, which I'm sure a lot of your listeners have heard or read. I didn't know about that book. I didn't know churches did this, but I had a buddy in our area who was about 10 years into their church plant. And they had seen kind of that typical church plant, like they had grown. And then for a variety of reasons, they were on the downward side of that growth.
Right.
And they were bumping into a lease negotiation. And as you can imagine out here, like lease expense is so crazy. So they were trying to determine like, okay, what do? We're not the size we used to be. Do we kind of like replant? Do we just go rent out a school and go mobile, whatever? And their elders threw out the option of like, what if we just merged with another church? And they approached us and said, hey, of all the churches in our area, we love what God is doing there. We were the most closely aligned theologically. And they said, would you ever consider a merger? And like, God, I mean, yes, I'm not going to say no to anything right away, but let's talk about it. And that just led to a series of conversations. Both elder teams read the book Better Together with each other. And excuse me, fast forwarding a lot of the story, we ended up merging those two congregations. And in the book, they do talk about like there's a few different types of mergers. One is what they call like a hostile takeover, which is like a thriving it's like the image of like a thriving church just like gets the keys to a building of a church. There's like 10 people left or whatever. Like that wasn't this story at all. But it also wasn't like a true marriage merger. Like we weren't changing our two names into one. We weren't merging our staff teams. Our elders weren't changing. So we went with the language of adoption for that one. And that was really important for us. So we adopted them into our family. And I had so many people tell me like, this may not be a good idea 2 years in. Like, this has the potential to be really bad. But dude, couldn't have been more opposite. It was and has been the sweetest thing. Like those, one of their elders at the time is now one of our elders. We had a guy that just rotated off our elder board, one of my closest friends, that was discipled by their lead pastor. That lead pastor of that church went on to become a counselor and therapist, and he's still part of our church.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, so it was just like,
you love seeing that. Just the story of just relationship and how God uses different churches in different seasons and how they can also come together. I think it's a beautiful thing. You hear it happening, but then you also hear negative stories, where ego gets involved, or there's just, it's not handled well and they don't have clear expectations. I've been through a few and they were all very, very good, I would say, but there could have been more like pre-conversations, like what this looks like and that sort of thing. But it sounds like you guys really took your time and did that lead into your second one going even better or even more smoothly?
The second one was so different. So like in the first one, they had no assets to speak of. So there was like, they had some cash in the bank, but there was like no property involved, no debt, nothing. And essentially we used the cash that was left. Some of it was earmarked for like a mission thing that they were a part of. And we just sent that money on to that ministry. And then the rest of it we used to just severance out their staff because they still had a bunch of staff on the team and we wanted to care for them well. So essentially we adopted people like that. That was the people and passion. And it was great. Fast forward to, let's see, this would have been leading into 2020. We, as I mentioned, our church had grown and we were in the process of detaching from the sending church. And we were about to go to 3 services right when COVID was hitting in March of 2020. The blessing for us was that prolonged that for years. Because it was just a slow roll in Oregon. And so in 2021, if I'm getting my timeline right, in 2021, we brought before our congregation, let's see, sorry, Josh, that was 2022. We brought before our congregation, like, our lease is going to be running out soon and we need to figure out what to do. And we're just inviting you to pray. Like I'm going to do some hard work to knock on doors and talk to people, but you just pray that God would do something in a way that none of us gets credit for this. And dude, I literally just I put a team of people together and I called any building or business or church in our area that even kind of looked like it could be a church building and just asked the question like, hey, do you know of anything, either your building or another piece of property or this building? There were only 2 churches I didn't call. One of them, because I just knew the guy well enough to know that I had already had that conversation with him. The other one was with a guy named Jeremiah, who I had a conversation with a few years earlier about a merger.
Mm-hmm.
And he told me no. He said that his people still had some fight in them, was his language. Like they still wanted to.
Yeah.
And I respect that. Like I'm not trying to
Mm-hmm.
expand our little kingdom, And so I just didn't call him out of respect for him. But one day we're grabbing coffee, and I knew that their property, they were sitting on about 5 acres of land in just a really strategic part of our city. And so I asked him, like, hey, I know that you've said no merger, like, and I totally respect that, but would the church be willing to sell off a portion of the property to us? And he said, he goes, and you would just like build a church like next to us? And I go, yeah, I know this isn't ideal.
Right.
I'm not like,
that's like,
I don't want to do
that's
this.
a tough offer, to a pastor.
Yeah.
You're going to be like, what, 5 feet away? That's kind of awkward.
So we're going to share a parking lot.
Yeah. So we'll just wave at each other as we go in.
But like we're at a point where like we just had to do something,
Yeah, you're looking for all options. Yep.
And he goes, this is like, now, like, keep in mind, like COVID's like on its way, or in some ways behind us at that point. And his congregation, which I didn't mention this earlier, was 150 years old. And they have a long legacy in our area. And it was mostly older people, mostly 75 plus.
Yeah.
And COVID was hard on them. So they were down to about 30 adults on their roll, and obviously not all of them showing up. In fact, I would say half of them were still doing Zoom church at that point.
Yeah.
And so he goes, would you ever reconsider a merger? Absolutely. So we started down that road, but it was so different because you're not dealing with an elder board who's a support of it. It's a very different polity. You're dealing with a lead pastor who submits to a council, and they were part of a conference or denomination. So there was some of that stuff we had to work through. They had to take a vote. I mean, it was just so different. But again, like, the Lord was so kind to us through that process. So when they ended up taking the vote, I think it was like they just had to have 75%. I can't remember the numbers. It was like 75% pass, but it was 28. 30 people show up for the vote, 28 yeses, 2 no's, to shut the doors and become part of Table Community. And dude, it was so. This is a church that has some of the sweetest saints in it, but they've been part of that church since they were younger than we are. Like, that was their church, and their kids have grown and moved on, and so they just hadn't even had a children's ministry for years.
Wow. So
their first Sunday with us is Easter Sunday. A typical Sunday for us is about 140, 150 kids. So and it's a tiny building, so there's kids everywhere.
They're hanging off the rafters.
Dude, it is insane. And so, and then Easter especially. So you have like the kind of the energy of Easter. And this was their first Sunday with us, and they were just in tears. Like, one of the women, sweet sister, just said, she was like, I literally didn't know churches like this existed.
Wow.
And what she meant by that is like churches that have kids running around that are, their words would be like a thriving church. We didn't know. We just thought all churches were like our church. And every week's been like that. I mean, it's been so fun to watch them like come alive again in that context. The lead pastor, Jeremiah, came on staff with us. He's actually tomorrow leaves for sabbatical. We told him once the dust settled, go on a long sabbatical and get some rest and heal up.
Nice. But that's awesome. What a picture, though. I mean, that is the church, and is that picture of, and it's happening all over, where there's churches that have facilities, but for whatever reason are struggling. And I love the stories of adoption, and then the blessing of passing that on, so you guys can utilize that building, because it's just at the end of the day, it's a tool. And I know we all get connected to buildings and places. That's part of being human. But at the end of the day, I just love the stories of them seeing kids running around and seeing God's hand in that. And that's really,
Yeah.
it had to be in God's timing too. It sounds like from, you're probably thinking a couple years earlier would have been great, but
Yeah.
it wasn't God's timing, so.
Well, wasn't God's timing, but man, he did it in a way that like none of us, it's funny. I had to go through calling 100 different churches to end up having coffee with the one church I didn't reach out to. That's how it kind of came to be. It was like, it was later.
Wow.
Yeah, it's been so sweet. So that one was just a totally different type of merger.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was still, we would have called it an adoption merger, but
Mm-hmm.
it was, they were bringing a property and an asset to the table, and we were bringing leadership and momentum and
mm-hmm.
people and all that
That's
kind
huge.
of stuff.
That's huge. It's interesting. Just thinking of Portland, right? I mean, you when you don't live in Portland, like I don't, you read things online, or just going back to COVID and all the challenges and people, move, the great exodus of different states. What has that been like for you? I mean, I know that it's always overblown online or on the media. It's never really reality, whether that's pro or negative to any type of news. But it's encouraging to hear not only from you, but some of the guys around our table at the conference were from your area and even like Idaho and other places in the West. And they were sharing stories of growth and people coming to Christ. And so I just think for those listening, they're probably asking the question, like, based on what people say or what the media depicts Portland, you would almost think if you were down a negative mindset, like, is God working there? Like, is it just godless and everybody's leaving and which I totally don't agree with. But tell us, just like, obviously you've been sharing what God's doing, but give us a reality check of what God is doing in Portland and what God is doing in the West. Because I think that's just maybe a perception that's not reality for a lot of us that aren't in the West.
Yeah, I would agree. It's not reality. I'll take it in two steps. One, when I moved to Portland, so pre-COVID, just the West in general, I moved to Portland very specifically because I wanted to get a conservative theological education in a progressive West Coast city, because I was thinking I would get my education and then move back to Florida and do ministry there. And then I would just have this like knowledge of basically our knowledge of where the East Coast is headed in the next 10 years anyways.
Sure.
So moved to Portland, and kind of with that mindset, I just thought like, man, this is this like godless society. And I just realized quickly, like, I was wrong. There were so many churches that were thriving. Like, and to this day, there are churches that are just doing really wonderful work. And it was refreshing for me coming from where we grew up, because you live in the land, and I'm sure this has changed since I've been gone a long time, but back then for sure it was like this cultural Christianity. Everyone, if you just stop someone on the street, they would probably, claim some version of Christianity, but you don't know like where they're at on the like pathway of discipleship. Like some of them are taking their faith really seriously and others aren't. And like, so your challenge as a pastor in that context is to try to figure out kind of where people are. In our context, that doesn't really exist. You have what I would say are like committed, passionate followers of Jesus, and then you have those that aren't, because there's like zero cultural pressure to be in this case. In fact, there's like great incentive to not be one of these Christian people. And so those that are, I find, are just like really in. And that was my experience early on. And pastoring, that has just been
that's
confirmed. Awesome. And Portland, because it can be a difficult place, it certainly is a progressive city and area. Churches I don't find there to be any competitive nature in pastors or in churches here, which was not my experience in Florida. And then I was on staff at a church in Alabama for a while when we were in college, just out of college. And that wasn't my experience there either. There always just seemed to be some sort of like competition or jockeying for whatever. And in Portland, it's like everyone is in it together.
Yeah, that's huge. I love that. Tell us real quickly. I know we're getting close to time here, but you talked about your doctorate work, and I know you mentioned you really have been working on a teaching team strategy about how you equip and multiply leaders.
Yeah.
Tell me about how that's, because we're developing that here. We have a great team, but we're trying to make it better. I'd
Yeah.
love to just hear what are some lessons you've learned implementing that, and why that's so healthy for you and your church.
Yeah. So I backed into this conviction before I even planted the church, but it started at the church that sent me out. I wanted to learn how to preach, and
Mm-hmm.
the only when you only get to preach once every few months, it's hard to
Mm-hmm.
like build that um, those muscles. And
Yeah.
so I went to my lead pastor at the time and said, "Hey, I know you write your sermons on Wednesday. Can I just like sit in your office and learn? Like
Mm-hmm.
just talk, like as you're writing, just tell me what you're doing so I can like get into
Yes.
this habit." And he goes, "Yes, and there are some other guys in our church that were in seminary." And he said, "What if we just did a team? What if we just like wrote it together?"
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what we started doing. It became this like sermon prep team. Now, given this guy's temperament and personality mix, like he did not enjoy that. Like he would have much rather just gone and done it on his own. But I fell in love with it. And so by the time I planted the church, I just said, "This is how I'm going to write my sermons because it helps me. I don't get feedback after the sermon. I get it before I ever preach it. I get real time like insight into who our people are because my sermon prep team is not just seminary students or other pastors. It's like single stay at home or single moms, stay at home moms, those who have theological training, those who do not, different ages of people. And so it's been super helpful. And then I mentioned to you when I ended up doing my doctoral work, my dissertation was um, on that topic. So obviously I did a lot of research on like the benefits and the negatives and how to navigate that. But the fringe benefit to it is you develop other preachers in the process.
Mm-hmm.
That's not why I did it. I did it
Mm-hmm.
so that the sermons I was delivering were better
Right. Yeah.
for our people, and it was
Right.
like there were mixed motives in that. Like I want to be a better preacher,
Well,
but I also
yeah.
want our
Yeah.
people to hear a better sermon.
I think it's all good reasons. Yeah. But the outcome is you're developing and they're developing.
Yeah.
And I love
Yeah.
that.
So
I definitely want to learn from you more in that because I love our team here and love to encourage and build them up. But at the same time, I was part of a multi-site church in the past, and we did that a lot.
yeah.
Maybe some in some seasons more than others, but doing the same text, the same series, the same book of the Bible, you'd walk away with so many extra insights and perspectives
Mm-hmm.
that just made you better. And I think that's the heart of it all. And it does take a teachable spirit though,
Yeah.
coming from
Yeah.
you and those that are learning from you, because you have to be open for their feedback and
Mm-hmm.
insight too. So I think that's awesome.
Yeah, yeah, you have to if you go into the room thinking like I'm the smartest person in the room or I'm the best preacher in the room, that setting's going to be really difficult.
Yeah, well, it's not
If,
good.
yeah, if you go in with like an open mind and like I have a lot to learn here,
Right.
there you will learn a lot and your sermons will get significantly better, in my
It's
opinion.
awesome. That's great. So what are some final comments you would give to other pastors that are listening, or leaders in the church that are really trying to make a difference and really be a church that's on mission like you've described today?
Yeah, um, and I don't know that I have a ton of wisdom or advice. What I will say is this, like, and I'm assuming for most people listening to this podcast, they have the same desire. Like, I so badly just want to finish well.
Mhm.
I have no interest in just jumping from church to church. I definitely don't want to burn out or have a moral failure or ask by my elders to leave. I intend, Lord willing, to pastor these people for my 30 years or whatever. Um,
Mhm.
and then hand it off. I joke with our people all the time. Like I intend to hand it off to a kid in the nursery. It's like in our nursery right now. Someday when he's 25, 30 years old, it's like, all
That's
right, now
awesome.
it's like, this is your
Yeah.
thing. That's my hope. And,
Mhm.
and I'm sure a lot of leaders feel that way. But that takes a lot of intentionality. Like
Oh
it
yeah.
takes discipline. It takes a commitment to spiritual disciplines. It takes a commitment to care for your family through that process and to be a good father and husband. So one of the things I've been doing, which your listeners probably already do, but I'll just throw it out there, is like, I just try to surround myself with men who have done what I want to do and have finished well or are finishing well. So like after we get off this call, I'm going to walk back down to my office and then grab a beer with a guy in our area who's been pastoring the same church for 30 plus years. And he's passing the baton soon. And as much as I can, I'm trying to surround myself with men like that, so that I didn't have a lot of like great examples. I know some people do, but like for me, my story led me to and through some kind of unhealthy church situations. And so my examples didn't usually end well. And so I'm just determined to not have that be my story.
That's good. Well, I love that your heart is to finish well. And that's really one of the reasons, me and Jay really started this podcast, and we love these conversations because we get to learn from other leaders. And because when you stop learning, you stop leading. And I appreciate you taking time to join us, man. This has been just really cool to catch up with you. And I know there's way more in the tank that you could share with us today. But I'd appreciate you taking time to share what God's doing at Table Community and in your life. And I hope we'll have you on in the future. So.
Yeah, dude, I feel like we barely scratched the surface I have like so many questions for you too. Not that it's not my podcast, but I just feel like we could chat for a while. So
absolutely,
I would be honored.
No, this has been great. So this has been episode 97. We're almost to 100. I don't know what that means, Justin, but it's kind of crazy. But we're just so thankful that you jumped in. But definitely, if you are listening, I want to encourage you to check out Justin and Table Community on their website, and I'm sure your guys are on social media as well. But just save it, pray for them. He's a great Bible teacher, great preacher. So I've been able to track and listen to you lately, and you're just doing such a great job. And I know God is going to continue to use your church. And man, it's such a blessing to connect with you again. But hey, if you have questions for the podcast, you can email us at thepastorpod@gmail.com. We're also on social media, YouTube, and of course, all the different podcasting platforms. But hey, if you have questions, topics you want us to discuss in any future episodes, please let us know. But from myself and Justin, thank you for joining us for another Pastor Pod episode. Have a great day.